Book Club evening. I'm Linda Pastori. I'm the General Manager of Development for the stations, and we're delighted to have you join us tonight. This represents the start of many gatherings, no doubt, that we will be holding virtually over the weeks ahead. So please note that in order to control background noise, all of you are on mute. It's not that we don't want to hear from you, it's just that we would like to have an uninterrupted interview tonight. So we will be encouraging questions at the end. And so go ahead and feel free to chat. My co-host, one of my staff, Nancy, will be getting those questions and getting those on to Katie, who is interviewing Linda tonight. And so speaking of Katie, it's my great pleasure to introduce our KJZZ. Katie, I think you'll have to say something, get yourself popped up there. Our
hello.
Senior news producer, Katie Campbell. Katie works to produce KJZZ's local program, The Show. She is a native Floridian. I said that right, didn't I?
You did.
And graduated from the University of Florida's College of Journalism before trading the humidity for a dry heat. Katie worked for WUFT News, the NPR and PBS affiliate housed at the college. That experience led her to Arizona in 2015 to report for the News 21 investigative team at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. She later covered courts in Pinal County, including cases of child abuse and sex trafficking, then kept watch over the State House of Representatives for the Arizona Capitol Times. Katie will be introducing our very special author this evening. Katie.
Thank you so much, Linda. And on to our honored guest, other Linda Smith. U.S. Representative Linda Smith founded Shared Hope International in November of 1998 to fight sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation and to serve the long-term restoration needs of women and children in crisis. Shared Hope is active today in countries that circle the globe. She also founded the War Against Trafficking Alliance in January 2001 to coordinate regional and international efforts necessary to combat sex trafficking. Linda began serving in 1983 as a Washington state legislator. She won a write-in campaign for Congress in 1994, and given my experience in legislature, I can tell you that is no small feat. Congratulations. Her compassionate and uncompromising belief that every individual has dignity has carried her from the halls of Congress to searching out victims in the red light districts around the world. Linda and her husband, Vern, reside in Vancouver, Washington, and are the proud parents of 2 and grandparents of 6. Well, thank you so much, Linda, for joining us tonight, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for tuning in, especially as we figure out these interesting technological times. So, Linda, let's just jump right in. I mean, you start the book describing some of why you wrote this and some of why you've taken on this larger mission that you have today. But let's start from the very beginning. What is the story behind the story, Renting Lacy?
I think the story behind the story is I took a call I really didn't want to take, but I'd committed to taking while I was in Congress. And the call, the guy just talked like 45 minutes, and he just kept talking, and I thought he was exaggerating. He talked about children in India who are being sold for sex by the thousands. And even though, Washington, D.C. exaggerates a bit, I felt that was maybe even more so, but I couldn't sleep. I just couldn't sleep. I kept seeing this picture in my brain. I just couldn't sleep. And so I got an expedited visa and I went to India with the days. I had 5 days between boats. And sure enough, there were children younger than my granddaughter, and they were being sold for the sex act over and over and over. And I couldn't tell the ages sometimes. They were just all undernourished. All the ones I saw were just kind of, their eyes were hollow. And I thought, but I'm not the softest marshmallow in the bag. I tend to not be the counselor type. Let me organize it. I'm happy to do that. I can run it. I can help you. And all I saw was a need was human. And there was this little girl, anyway, I touched her, and it was like all of a sudden her humanity was there. And I could not stop thinking about doing something. So it was a matter of just a couple days, organized enough money, figured out how to start some safe houses under another group that I was there to meet called Teen Challenge. They were the ones showing me the street, the little boys. They wanted me to see mainly the little boys and who were on the streets, but they had figured out that some of the little boys were born to women in the brothels, and they were actually procuring clients for their mommies to bring them to the brothels, and that they were all owned by people. So started the first safe houses. Within 2 days, funded it, thought, now I'm done, I'm going back to America. This is not me, but I couldn't let go because I got children. And these young women and children, it was like, well, if I just start it and don't go on, then what happens? And I really couldn't stop. So I built out an acreage in the mountains, and then found out about 1 out of 4 were kids from Nepal. And they wanted to go home, and they like their culture. It's cooler, the food's different, smells different, sounds are different. And they were homesick, and they didn't want to stay there and go into a safe house. They wanted to go home. So started 2 in Nepal, and this was all within a few months. And it was like, how do you start? Stop. I couldn't figure out a way to stop, and then didn't want to stop. And so just changed my life to helping those kids, and that's how it started.
And then, of course, eventually you learn what seems unimaginable to a lot of people, right? That this is not just happening abroad, but right here in our own backyards, in states that we all call home. Tell us a little bit about how that came about, and the women and girls that you met through that investigation.
Mm-hmm. Well, fortunately, I had very strong relationships in that short time I was in Congress, and I worked on the human rights issues. So there were so many issues that were bipartisan that I was involved in that they wanted the new Trafficking Act that passed right at the crack of when I left, like December. It was really close. And they wanted that to be enforced. So Congress wanted to do something to bring it from a concept to a real practice. So they asked if I organized the work. It was actually a big conference, a world conference on trafficking in the United States. And they just started the new trafficking office in the Trafficking Act of 2000. And so I was in this new office working with trafficking in persons, new people, and we organized the first World Summit. I realized really quickly that I needed to incorporate America, and that I needed to talk to women that were helping women, and that likely they were working with traffic victims, but I thought it was probably across borders. So they were included also, and I started realizing American trafficking looked like India trafficking in some ways, that it was domestic, that most it was American men buying indigenous people from their own country. American men were buying American women, I thought. And the more I looked at that, the more I realized through investigations that I did for the Department of State and Department of Justice of America and other countries, that America's trafficking was clearly men buying American children. And the market, I thought the market was really women doing what women wanted to do. And if they wanted to do something what I thought was kind of stupid, then just do it. But then I found out, no, American men could get that by staying late at a bar. They were really wanting vulnerable and young. And the product report is what it was. It was called Demand, that I brought to Congress and turned back to them for the congressional record, stated simply, in America, trafficking is American men predominantly buying young, and that my investigations, our investigation had found all over the United States, that I was looking at middle school children's faces on the undercover frequently, and that these were just kids. And I was just appalled. They said, well, how come we can't see it, Linda? They didn't question that I was telling them the truth because I was showing them video. I said, because we're not looking. We can't believe it because we buy the old lie that someone would just like to be like that. And if you believe it's women then we as women, if this is mostly a women's club or book club, that we as women, we don't like to restrict ourselves from and be told what to do. If it's children and it's vulnerable, we're right on it, and we're not going to buy a lie. And I realized I had to then show people what was really there. And if Congress didn't know it, and I was on the Human Rights Caucus, and I had worked as the chair of Children and Family Services for a state, Senate leader, I had that committee, and I didn't know, I didn't think America would know it or believe it. And if they didn't know it or believe it, they wouldn't want to change it. And that was going to take a lot. So out of that came, and the investigation came, a book called Renting Lacy. And it was on a lot of the girls that I had met over those first few years that were trafficked in America. And some had become adults I could talk to, and some were still very young, brought to me by the FBI to do exit interviews so we could do training videos. And so Renting Lacy is about those real stories of real girls. And I was hoping to wake up America with what is more of a storybook, but it's very real. It's really about, all the characters are based on real people.
Absolutely. And so that's something that stood out to me about the book is obviously with the depth of research you've done over the years, your own personal, you've seen it, you've talked to these people, you've talked to the investigators, you've done the work. You easily could have written like a textbook, right? You could have gone on and written a tome and chapter after chapter and said, well, this is what's happening in Arizona versus Nevada, etc. But instead you went with this compelling narrative format. And as our Linda mentioned, I've covered cases like this in Pinal County here in Arizona before. And as we discussed the other day, I mean, the very first story I wrote about Pinal County, Arizona was about a former victim of child sex trafficking who is now grown and is advocating for these women and girls and boys who get swept up into it. And so I kind of discovered how difficult it is to put words to something like this and to really help people understand what it is that these people go through. How did you do it? How did you go about helping the reader get into the minds of these girls who are being abused?
I immersed myself over a period of time, and I found Cindy, who was a writer to children. I needed actually, or youth, I needed actually somebody to help me with that young voice, kind of the irritating voice that you know, your middle school kid. And so I had to immerse her with me. And I took one of the girls, actually she's one in the book, you know, the truck driver and the Katie, you know, it's her. And it's a real person. And she actually rescued a real girl herself. But we went into Las Vegas and spent some time there, and she started going back into herself as a child. Most kids have been taken to Las Vegas or parts of Florida, different tourist sites, often Disneyland, but very common in Las Vegas because there's so many tourists and so many shows, and especially anything violent. And so the pimps will share, and now we know the gangs actually share girls, which is unusual. They didn't used to do that, and they do now. So they get enough product into market to really maximize their return. And so we used that. I used Atlanta, Georgia, went into places where some of the girls had been in their real life. And then I went back to all the transcripts of things that we used, and I used as I was doing training videos of real girls. And then some of them I've had with me for years. And at that point, not as many years, but because they have so few places to go, they often cannot work. And so we have a program at Shared Hope where I pull them really close to us at the corporate office. We train them and get them acclimated to do something, get into a business climate, learn the right language. So I know them, and it takes a few years often to really have them tell you the truth, because they see me often like, Grandma, it's Linda, I don't want to tell her this awful things that I did. And when they read Renting Lady, they go, oh, Lacy, it's like, oh, we know. She knows already. And so I can write it only because I know it intimately over a period of time. Renting Lacy, though, still was painful for me to write. It still hurts to think of what the girls go through. And I had to take so much of that book out that people couldn't read. I edited it down by a good third, I'm going to say a half maybe, because people could not hear what really happens to these girls.
I think that's a good segue to my next question. I mean, you start the book, you lay out the scene, you kind of explain, like, you tell the reader, I am going to take you to places you don't want to go, essentially, and I'm going to use language that you're not going to like. I'm going to use this offensive, these terms that are on the street, but there's a point there, right? How important was that to you to not, I mean, you said you had to cut it in half, but how important was it to you to not water down the language? Why was that so key to telling this story?
It was important to me that I was honoring the victims and the women who had lived through this and the ones that were in my life, that they were good with it. That was the most important thing for me, that this didn't dishonor the real experience I had at all. And you have to use the real language. And so I think that was the primary, but when it comes to preventative, I wanted this to be a preventative book. I wanted people to see the language. If they heard it coming out of their child's mouth, if they heard it in passing, they would know that real people don't use the word square. There's words used. Now, they change just like language changes somewhat, but the issue of you don't call your family a stable. There's certain things that dehumanize it that have stayed with the language. And there's certain things that when you hear them, you should know that. I am going to, when we come back out with Renting Lacy again, I won't change it, but I'm going to update the language again. There isn't a lot of change, and if you go online, you can see the changes. But in general, they have a stable, or they say they have family and wifeys, multiples, sisters, and they're all a family, and he is daddy, or whatever, and they replicate what they've left behind. And yet really it's usually the thing that you'll pick up on is this dehumanizing. You think about a stable, that's a common term.
I wonder what kind of feedback you got from the book. Did you hear from people who just thought that went too far? Did you hear from people who didn't think it went far enough?
In general, it was so far beyond what most people thought that you can't make something like that up. I had one mother, only one, who got a hold of me and said, how dare you? My child shouldn't have read that. And her child was 8. And I said, well, why? I just at the coffee table, she said. And I said, well, it says mature content. Don't let your child read this, but know what's in it to protect your child. But that was the only one. I have had people say, I was reading it, Linda, I believe you, but I couldn't read anymore. I kept crying. And I think there's soft souls of some people that just can't. But no, I think it is so real, so difficult. And by the time I wrote the book, having Ernie Allen of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children be my reviewer and doing the foreword says it's credible. He's the one that wanted me to actually leave more of the book in. He said, I've been saying for years, it was missing and exploited children, Linda, that exploited. And, you know, there's another book I've just written that Ernie and I wrote together. And we talk about how the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was started, and it was trafficked boys to begin with.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I think that for me, the whole book's credibility and ability to read it had to come to a point where I felt I would get criticism by somebody, but it was okay because this was such a hard topic and people didn't believe it to begin with. And if I was just discovering it and I had been over an agency's budget in Washington State on missing and exploited children and family issues, I'd been on the Human Rights Caucus for Congress. And if I didn't know, been in sentencing guidelines for the state of Washington, and I didn't know, then why would I expect you to? So cracking into the emotions of people in a in a way, they can go either way. They can go to despair, anger. You can go to despair and hide, or you can go to anger and say, doggone it, I'm going to change that. And I count on that with a certain number of women. Some men have come slower. Shared Hope has a group called the Defenders, and they're meeting again to say, basically, if men don't lead this, we don't win. And so they're organizing even stronger to get more men into the movement. But I know the mama bear is going to take it on, and we are not going to allow it. And it's similar, and some of you were involved in this, and some of you might not have been, but you remember the domestic disturbance. There are big fights to change one word. This is not a disturbance, it's violence. And so to convince people in each state, because it went federal, kind of like the trafficking issue started with a federal law, and then we had to pass state laws all over the United States and all states. With this, you'll probably remember, it started federally, and then it had to march through the nation one state at a time. And the big issue is not a disturbance, it's violence. So for me, I wanted you to see these children that were in all 50 states prostitution laws at that time. As children, not as they were labeled as a prostitute. So they're called, and still in 19 states, they're called prostitutes, and they can still be arrested. There's a lot of reason they say we should still arrest them, but they align a lot to the slavery movement and the arguments in Congress of, well, we don't know what to do with them. They won't be able to survive out there. The pimp will get them again. All those things that had justified them being called slaves and kept in slavery. Well, this is the same. You call them a prostitute and you've never served them as a victim of a violent crime, and you continue to call them a prostitute. Why would we want to arrest the men that are buying them for sex? Because it's just prostitution, you know. So that cultural change that we had to have, changing the word disturbance. Don't go behind the doors. It's disturbing. They would go to the door and say, you're making too much noise. So we had to say, we do not let anyone say it's okay to be beat up. Even if she said that, somebody's going to jail. Now, we have a lot of argument, but it was a very interesting argument because it was women from all political sides or none came together on that issue and said, no, it's violence. We will not tolerate any kind of violence. Now we're facing that again with girls like you read about in Renting Lacy. Some would say they're prostitutes. They should be able to do that. But I think what I wanted to tell everyone from what I researched, I only found one woman as an adult that made a decision that was conscious, that stayed there very long. And she was from New Zealand to Australia. Now, some would say, well, some as they get older, they make that decision because on drugs or in college doing something stupid. Not very long. They might make a first step to something stupid. But I don't know, ladies, how many women want to have sex with 10, 20 guys a day, or even sex every day, and say, oh, that's just great. I like that. And it's violent to our bodies. It deteriorates us. And so it's like, how could they keep children, especially children, in the prostitution law and then deny them? Now, I just recently started going back into archives, and I'm writing again. And I'm taking the old research, and one of the places that I was, well, I'm not going to say where it was right now, but I was getting records from the defense attorneys for the children who were being arrested, and they were bringing them out to me. And they were redacting the names, so it wasn't like they were giving me that information. But I've seen the arrest records, and the one that shook me the most was a 12-year-old, a little Black girl. She was 12 years old, not developed, and they let the 47-year-old man she was having sex with in a car go because there was $40 laying there. And I have the arrest record of the officer. Now you would say, well, why did the officer arrest her? Because in that state, like the other 50, you arrest the prostitute, and most states didn't have any age. So I was finding 12, 13-year-old kids who were arrested and put in jail. And then the excuse, well, we don't know what else to do with them. Do what you do with an abused child. Figure it out. Don't just use an excuse of putting them in jail. But again, I knew when I was working on Renting Lacy and in the middle of this, that I had a cultural bias, somewhat like we had with domestic disturbance and changed it to violence. What I know is commercial sex is extremely violent. And all the women who have been in it that I've been involved with say, you just get used to certain nuns, that's what they want. If they want sex, they're gonna stay at a bar. If they want sex, they can go online and hook up. This is not about sex, it's about power and often violence, intimidation, and breaking down the humanity of the other person. Can you tell I'm a little passionate about this?
Just a little, just a little. We appreciate that. I want to go back to something you said a few moments ago that caught my attention that I think is important to mention too. I mean, you described what they left behind, what these girls, these children, whoever that gets wrapped up into this, what they leave behind. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about who Lacy and Star and all of these girls, who they really are. I mean, they had very different endings. And of course, we got a heartbreaking look at Star's past life in particular with her grandmother. If you could talk a little bit about the variety of backgrounds that this reaches.
Mm-hmm. I have had right across the hall from me and from my office, a woman she got out of prison, and she had fought a guy that was beating her up, and he was old enough, he had a heart attack. He was 82 years old, and she went to prison for manslaughter. She was 16 then, but she started being sold by her stepfather in the home at the age of 9. And he started using her then, and then actually in the basement selling her. And she'd run away, and they'd bring her back, not believing what she was saying. Finally, she'd run away and lived on the streets with another group of kids. And she said she never prostituted out there, but because he picked her up, giving her a ride, this old 80-some-year-old man, she thought it was safe. Well, he wasn't safe, but they perceived her as a prostitute, therefore she had no grace. So here she is, she's an unraised kid out of prison. She served, let's see, from 16 to 21, 5 hard years. And then they put her out, but she had no education, or she had really had a life or people. And she ended up back in jail. And when I got her, she was actually doing community service at another, it's a place for street kids that my husband and I are involved in. And she was doing community service there. And the manager of this program said, Linda, you have to listen to her. I think she's one of your girls. Well, I found out that she had that felony. She could hardly survive. She couldn't work. She couldn't go to school to be a lot of the things she wanted to be. And she had extreme anger problems. I might have anger problems too. And you have to be used to those kind of things. So 4 years, trained her in basically how to be an adult person in a business world or an office world, and taught her basic accounting. And then she was able to start, and I actually finally, after the first year, I hired her because there's no way she could get a job and survive. And she was awesome. And now I am back with her. I'm with her all the time. She's part of my life, but I'm looking at trying to expunge her record because she should have had self-defense. Right. So I had this baby that came out of prison who was still a kid who really hadn't ever been raised and not really had a normal life. So that's her. Then another young woman who I did an intervention with the police. Her name is Brianna. She's public now. She's in one of the school training videos called Chosen. She was one of those really bright kids that went through college at the same time she was in high school. So she graduated college and high school the first 2 years, that same Running Start program. It was what it was called in our state, but very, very gifted. And she had started nursing school, and along came a guy at the restaurant she was working at, a 17-year-old girl, and he built a friendship, and he was actually aligning her to be sold into Phoenix for the spring games and the New Year's parties. And I was brought in to intervene to talk her out because it is her 18th birthday and you can't really violate her privacy then. So they're pretty good at figuring out how. They're really smart. And she thought she was just going to Phoenix for a week vacation with a new friend. They'd actually sold her. So when the police called, they knew all this, a lot of it, but they needed an intervention. They could not violate her rights to privacy. And yet she was a part of this being picked up by the rings along the I-5 corridor and down into California, into Arizona. They had a ticket for her. And she was supposed to be picked up by another friend because his ticket was a little bit later than hers. And it was a lie. They had just sold her. And, but her fear, and I don't want to go into the violence, but it wasn't quite the same because it got her before she got to Phoenix. And she had the fear of being stalked, just terrified. This brave kid was terrified. Took 2 years of her just calming her life down, working across the hall again with me. She had extensive skills, just extreme fear. And being stalked has a lot of the same kind of unsafe feelings that don't allow people to feel safe. Now, she had a family that was middle class, upper middle class. They had 5 kids. She was the youngest. And her mom said, we always had to keep her busy because she was just so smart. So she was working with her sister at this little restaurant. And when they identified her, they were just people coming in to eat. And she wasn't interested in some. She said, oh, they were slimy guys. And she didn't know who they were. Later, she saw when they got her into Seattle, some of those same people. And she thought it was kind of weird. These people were together, but she had no experience. And they were showing her around Seattle before they were flying her out. Now, she is a nurse today, and she's a nurse for severely burned children. And her goal is to start working somehow more with trafficking. Now, she still speaks, and if there's somebody that we need somebody to talk to and say, hey, she can talk to a survivor, help talk people out. But think about it. She wasn't vulnerable at all. She wasn't a kid in trouble. She wasn't looking to be in trouble, as was not the girl that is Lacy in the book. She really was stalked, and she was stalked. She was in an area in Ohio that had a high level of traffickers, we find out now. And there's 2 girls with her same profile that are very close. One was from the Northwest, but she was actually from Ohio. And I found out that her mommy was a mess. And she says that, so alcoholic, and would go to see her grandma and live with them part of the time. And grandma was trying to keep things together. And the kid got her blue ribbons by art and by track. And she would walk to school, to this special school, and they identified her on the street walking to school. So it was very meticulous over, I think it was around 6 months, quite a while, before one day it was raining and she got in the car. And then it all changed. But he was a friend, he was a nice guy. He had been nice. And so the change could come very rapidly. But then he said to her, you chose to get in my car. You chose. I didn't make you do anything. And the kids actually believe it. So a lot of that logic of the pimping is very similar, especially to that middle school age brain.
Right. I do want to make sure we have plenty of time for everyone's questions. Have we received any at this point that we should address? We got 2. All right.
So Nancy should be sending that to you.
Great.
And Linda, please feel free to take some time before we wrap up tonight after the questions to share about Shared Hope and what you're doing. I know that all of us I always feel like once you find out about something, now you're responsible for that information.
Yes, I agree totally.
So I want to encourage you to be able to take that time tonight too, to share about Shared Hope.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't think this is an easy topic for people, and it hasn't been an easy path. But I think the thing that's important from what I've just said is this. I realized then that laws in all 50 states basically set these kids up. Because if they were the criminals and the buyers were barely misdemeanors, if anything, then they had no way of anybody being sympathetic to them because they were just little hoes. In fact, the laws and the debate and the discussion were just disgusting, trying to change the laws to even have them have a domestic minor sex trafficking law in their states. I had one man say, I won't say where it was from, but I just trained my daughter better than this. So even though he had heard what had happened to the child, he was the sheriff of a county. He still said that to us after we were called to train in their area. And I just think I had to train my daughter better. So he was so biased. He heard what happened to these kids, didn't even faze him. Okay,
You know, that's a good segue into our first question that we've got. What can be done to get law enforcement to treat the men involved as the criminals they are and stop criminalizing the girls?
It has to do more with your policymakers and your culture than it does law enforcement, because they can only enforce the laws in front of them. Now, yes, there are some that are biased, but in general, especially in your area, Phoenix, Mesa, Scottsdale, Tempe, you've got so many different law enforcement entities there that are actually digging in and really, they've led the nation. I've often reported on the area when I'm training in other areas, and they will talk to other law enforcement. They were actually dealing with these cases before it was popular to deal with them. And so I had to be in the area on occasion because I had cases that both Brianna that I mentioned, as well as in the Chosen series, her name's Steph, we call her Lacy in that one. They were both being moved to the Phoenix, Scottsdale area. So I started going, oh, what's happening here? But in your area, just like the rest of the nation, when I looked at the laws, I realized I had to change the laws. Because law enforcement can only enforce the laws that are in front of them if it says arrest the prostitute, but don't arrest the man. They're just going to write him a ticket. Now, I think for us right now, the bigger issue is how do we get the courts to actually bring about a prosecution? How do we get the juries all to see these kids as the victims they are? So if you're in court and we got 12 people and they have, some of them, even one has the bias, and 100% of the jury. So you look at two things. You look at the culture, the law. The law won't change unless you change the culture to actually pass the law. And then you have to have the will to push your local officials to enforcing that law and prioritizing the buying and selling of kids. And this has been the biggest issue of probably the whole movement. And that is to require them to enforce demand. So when you arrest or you go and you have a sting, the men need to be treated the same as the buyer as the seller. And you have people that differ with that, but if there were not a buyer, there wouldn't be a seller. And to pretend they're shopping for adults is not true. You know what the market is. You put up something that's saying 12, 13, 14 years old, you have more hits on that site thinking it's a child than you do on an adult woman by 10 times over. So we know the market is young and we know they're shopping for children. How dare we not make that our priority? But we still see the culture allowing it. If you knew there were even 50 slaves being told to do horrible things in Phoenix today, you guys would be picketing around wherever that was. Well, there are. As you and I close the night and prepare to go to bed, there are people all over your greater area that are minors being sold to men that are shopping there. And they don't have any choice in what's happening to them. They might say, why don't they run away? Where do they run away to? Who do they trust? Who do they believe? But even if a kid does something stupid, we don't let adults prey on them. And that really is happening. So I wouldn't be so rough on police because they have to follow sheriffs, their county leaders. But I would support any activity of supporting your police and encouraging anything good about cases that arrest buyers. Commend that, because as they cut police, you're going to see your units that deal with specialized crime like this, they're being cut all over the United States. So these vulnerable kids, you're talking about a very intensive investigative process. It takes a lot of law enforcement. And my fear is it took so long to get some units that could deal with these children and these arrests of buyers and sellers. And now will there be the capacity, because these kids are not easy to manage, and these cases are not simple cases. But these buyers need to see other buyers with their face on the front page of the newspaper from buying sex with kids, not just Epstein, but people right there in the greater Phoenix area. I am not hearing anything.
Sorry about that. That was my fault. I had to cough earlier and I couldn't unmute myself.
Oh, that's okay. All of a sudden
desperately motioning.
Is this me or is it them?
Oh goodness, we're all just we're listening raptly. Okay,
I hope I answered that question.
You did. That was fantastic. Thank you. And similar as well. So you just mentioned that we've worked so hard to get these units who can investigate these cases. So similarly, are you familiar with any programs that are currently rescuing girls and boys, as we mentioned, all victims in Arizona?
Your police, your police in greater Phoenix area, parts of Arizona, are probably some of the best trained because they're training each other. There is an organization headed by Nancy Baldwin, and all of a sudden I'm going, let's see, it's Arizona Trafficking Network. I'm saying it wrong. I'm going to ask somebody to look this up for me. She's sitting across from me. So, but it's alliance. It's an alliance of groups, and it is coordinated by a woman with a passion. And she was from a foundation originally. She called me one day and said, investigate Arizona again. And I said, we did. We now have to take, because we'd investigated 14 parts of the nation for the Department of Justice. And I said, well, you know, I don't want to investigate and run a report on Arizona again. I want to act on it. And most of the time people go, oh, that's too hard. She didn't take that lightly. And she has been bringing to this training conference that Shared Hope sponsors every year for law enforcement and first responders and others that work on this issue. And she has been bringing judges, your sheriffs, your police chiefs, all of this law enforcement to be trained, and then they train others. Okay, she just wrote it down. Arizona Trafficking Network, Arizona Anti-Trafficking Network, yeah, AATN. They have some awesome things. I would go on at any time and join with them. They have some work online with men that they go on and try to deter trafficking and buyers. They do some really, really good stuff. But by her bringing law enforcement to the table and repeatedly working to help them with operations, both funding and encouraging training, bringing in training, you have probably more law enforcement that have been trained than anywhere in the United States that we work, and we work all over the United States.
So that raises another question in my mind. How can everyone here then also do their part perhaps? Are there ways to volunteer maybe? Are there resources they can contribute through your own organization? And or are there things to look out for? Are there ways to spot that someone might be in need of help?
Yeah. You can go on to Share Hope's site, and there is a Take Action page, and you can do all kinds of things. Do something. You can, I think several folks there in Arizona they pass Renting Lacy around because it is so hard to believe this, but it helps for people to see this. So get material, understand the issue. Because if you don't understand it, you can't convince somebody else to join you. There's a lot of information on online, how to protect your children online. We have the Advocacy Action Center. You can actually be trained to be a spokesperson on the issue. It's called an ambassador for shared hope, but you just basically can articulate the issue in a variety of ways to a variety of groups. You will know then, will teach you and give you material so you can use that material. We have online ambassadors and they spread the information. So let's say today you just want to make sure that everybody around you understands how to keep their kids safe online. Well, there's an internet safety series of both videos and material that you can get online. Most of this has no cost. But if you get it out and people use it, you could actually save a life. Because this is something when people know it, they will actually intervene. We now get a lot of people through our network that will call into the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children because they now know what it looks like. Or they'll call us and we will figure out where they are and help them turn in that case because they know who it is. Right now, we're getting a lot of online predators, and you can understand how to identify those. And if you identify them in your own children's networks or your network, you can turn them in. So be active online. I mean, you've got your social media. Just pick up the online training and how to keep kids safe and send it to your network. One thing that's harder, and again, I appreciate the people that stand with me on this. It has taken me I shouldn't say me, I have an awesome team, but 10 years to change the laws in the 50 states, to organize the change, to first make sure there's a trafficking law around children, that men, and sometimes women, predominantly men, who buy children are considered a part of the Trafficking Act and get a heavy penalty, not a misdemeanor. And that children are considered victims in the social services system instead of going down a criminal justice path where they don't get services. There's 41 points of law that we have worked to change. And so it's 102.5 points. If you look at 41, 40 would be a rounder, but we have 41, so we had to make it complicated. And you look at that and you grade it A through F. When we started, we had 47% average for all the states. Otherwise, we barely had anything, and we had to scrape to give any points to most states. They just didn't acknowledge the domestic trafficked minor as a victim of a crime. Therefore, you couldn't really find much. You could assign, if they finally arrested somebody for violence against that individual, you might get some points. So we were very liberal in giving the states points, and there were 47%. At the end of 10 years, which we've just completed 10 years, and we're drafting the new report cards right now, we ended up the mid-80s. I think we're 87% or something like that of the core law. But we realized, and it goes back to the question, how do you make sure this is implemented? There's certain things in the law, like I didn't know how she was, or there's certain things, please, could get off the buyer. The buyer could get off. There was a bias to begin with because of the age of the child, but if you make the child testify and face the gang that trafficked her, you have a good chance she's not going to be ready as a child. So we have to get the law application fixed now. We have to make sure that when we pick up this buyer or seller, I just think the buyers where we have to focus, because it'll take care of the market if we can work on the buyers afraid of getting arrested. But when that happens, they're not going to wiggle out by getting all the money towards their defense attorney that gets them out on these pleas. Because see, you see right now what we found in the it's called Demanding Justice research that we did not very long ago. We found that there were going to be some arrests, but they were getting off with pleas. So they were pleading down so low that they were walking without any time. I think the first and worst one I saw was Michael Gilliland right there in your area, who came down from Denver to shop periodically. The judge was just about apologetic for giving him 15 days in jail and then a break for his business and then 15 days. This man was shopping for kids. You know, it's like, really? But see, that bias was so greatly there that when we get into where it's a judge, if the judge doesn't know, so training judges is very important, but if there's not a strong enough set of laws to protect the child or protect the victim so that they can actually go to trial, they'll plead down because they know they have the power. So right now we've drafted, and it's not public yet, although I think there's a couple of people right there in your area, I do know that are actually reviewing the next 36 points of law that sometimes overlap the existing ones. And one of the biggest goals is 19 states will arrest the child for prostitution. Now, you have some law enforcement say, well, we don't know what to do with it. And that old excuse now is gone. We can't allow that anymore. That'd be like saying you were raped and therefore I'm going to put you in jail to protect you. Any of you like that? And then now move down to being 13 and say you're raped by a whole bunch of people, but to protect you from that, we're going to violate your human rights. We're going to treat you as a criminal in the name of protecting you. Oh, maybe only for a few days. Well, you just reaffirmed what that girl thinks about herself or that child anyway. They've been told they're a whore. They've been used as a whore. The pimp calls them that. You're just told. You're a prostitute. And then you reaffirm it. And by the way, they tell them consistently, you're going to jail. Because criminals go to jail. And the moment they put them in jail, they confirm. And the pimps may be the only ones told them exactly what's going to happen. They're really messed up little lives that had messed up lives before the pimp got them. And so who's the truth teller there? We just affirmed what the pimp said. And I cannot imagine a child called a prostitute again in 19 states. Even though there's excuses, we need to do it because, we need to do it before. I'm going, okay, categorically, can you really take a class of children that's labeled prostitute and you take all of those offenses against them and treat them different than another child where the people didn't give money, but they raped them, they abused them? So why, because the criminal brought money to the crime, did this crime change? Culture, just plain culture.
Nancy, do we have additional questions? I don't see, and just in case everyone didn't see it in the chat, you can send your questions through the chat function in the Zoom if you have additional things. But are there any that have been sent directly to you, Nancy? Or to Linda? Well, that's all right. We can keep going.
2 more, huh? Okay.
Oh, we do have 2 more? Oh, maybe.
Well, either that or it was a victory sign. I'm not sure.
Ah, okay.
You know, when you ask questions about what can we do, the more we shine light into this, the more our culture is going to change it. The more women that know, I shouldn't say just women, men, I have men that work for me, men that are on our board, they're awesome. But man, if we can change the domestic violence situation, we can change this. And so I'm pretty well committed to say, well, are you getting a little older? I've got a 10-year plan. And at the end of that 10 years, we're going to have you look around and go, do you remember the time they used to call kids prostitutes and put them in jail? And I believe we're going to do that. And I hope it's not 10, because I really don't want to work another 10 years at the speed I'm working now. So maybe it's a 5-year plan.
So we do have 2 additional questions that Nancy sent me. Thank you so much. So one listener asks, what is Arizona's score? You were referring to the scores earlier. Can you tell us a little more about our state right here at home?
Yeah. Arizona has been working for some time to raise their grade, and aggressively has continually raised their grade. So I'm going to tell you where it's found to begin with. And I'm just going to pull up the score, actually. So I'll pull up the score here. I have somebody else pulling it up. Let's face it, I'm sitting here looking at you. So, but Arizona has had more, they had the earliest action of most states. You can go online to Shared Hope International, and you can actually go to the report cards. And so when you go into resources, you can just literally pull up your state, all 50 states and Washington, D.C. And then I think the score is 87%, but I hate to believe that. I will give you the right score, the right number here in a minute. But it will give you all of the 41 points of law for your state, and it also tells you what's missing. And I think you're going to be kind of surprised at what's missing. What we think is going to happen. In fact, she's just bringing it over here to me because I work in all 50 states, and we're right now working in some states, even though it's a crazy year, it's 83%. I was wrong. Arizona law, come on, I want to see, I think you still criminalize prostitution for kids. The state law does not prohibit the criminalization of minors for the crime of prostitution, nor does it provide for a specialized service response. Buyers of commercial sex may assert a mistake of age defense in cases involving older minor victims, shifting the burden to prosecution to obtain meaningful penalties. The argument that has been the strongest one that gets men off would be the Michael Gilland. I just didn't know how old she was. I wasn't doing that. No, she said she was 18. Now, it might be the only crime where you can run over a kid's life and say, but I didn't know they were a kid. Well, get off the shopping, get up, stop shopping. And it puts the burden of proof back on the kid. So you've got some real issues there, but remember, you're 83%. That means a lot of things have happened. You need to change these last key provisions, because as long as they're not changed, you're not going to see the buyers of traffic minors get the penalty that they should be getting. If you let them off, you're kind of saying it's kind of okay if they bought. It's not really a serious crime. They were just a guy out being a guy. As long as we do that, we're going to continue to have another man's and woman's child used for the sexual pleasure of these men. And to me, it's the stupidest defense, but they use it and they get away with it. The defense attorneys in most states are the ones that are our biggest problem, because they make the money off the men that have the money, and then they defend them, and the child usually doesn't have resources for the defense, and therefore you end up with bargains.
So that's related to our next question as well. You've talked a lot about police's role here, but as you illustrated in Renting Lacy, the prosecutors and the judges and the defense attorneys, they are a part of this process and this system. And so we have a question here. So do the state bar associations need training? Do the attorneys need to be trained in how to recognize and better deal with these cases?
Yeah. There is a lot of why don't you leave that there? Here you go. You can have it. Thank you for pulling that up for me. Everyone needs training, because you first of all have to get around the bias and your history. If you've always done something a certain way, you're always going to do it that way if you aren't trained. We build into the report cards, and we'll build even more into the next report card series, the numbers of individual I guess you could say occupations that need training. So if you think about the criminal justice system, from the juvenile justice system all the way to the jury and everybody in between, they all need to be trained. And if you don't, it's going to fall apart in any one place. So we have listed, and a lot of states are requiring that they be trained. A lot of states are requiring that the judges be trained. They're not necessarily putting money behind it or saying what the training looks like in a lot of cases. So we're looking at more clearly defining that. The other places that really have to have good training in identifying trafficking and teaching kids how to see the signs of trafficking are the schools, the Boys and Girls Clubs, any place that kids are, they need to be trained, because kids can be really good at protecting each other. The one series that we did called Chosen, it has a gang component and then a general component. The two girls teach how the pimps worked to trap them, teach the other kids that are in front of them how the trafficker works, so you can see the signs. And it teaches them how to protect each other. In that particular series too, for boys, it's more be a hero. This is what being a hero is. And that is protecting the friends around you. It isn't just saying, well, some people are like that. And we find that kids are really mentoring other kids, that there's a really good ways of protecting, and protecting children. Did I get off there a little bit? I think I did. Did that answer the question totally or too much?
No, I think it did, and it raises a quick follow-up as well. I believe during the truck stop scene in Renting Lacy, the trucker that it's being told from the perspective of mentions a John school, that so-and-so was sent to a John school. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and perhaps efforts to also educate maybe some of these individuals? Because with that particular character, and I don't know if he's based off anyone in particular, he justified it to himself. He said, it's been years and I've been on the road so long. So if you could speak to that side as well.
Yeah. Well, I think the male culture has pretty well built it in. I mean, you think even about a bachelor party, males saying it's okay to do certain things. And so it's become a culture of what it is to be a male. That is being changed, and people are changing it. But the John schools in particular depend on where they are in the nation, who's doing them, but they're usually taught by a woman who was a prostituted child and talks about what it was and how they felt about their sweatiness and their ickiness. And no, we might smile and nod, but you guys are repulsive. But talks about the victimization, the age, and educates them on what they're really doing and gives them no room. Now, my problem with some of them is they're on Saturday, and some places they let them just go and they don't tell anybody. It's part of the condition. Well, no, they should have to be off of work. They should have to lose work to be able to go to the school. They should have some sacrifice other than pay for the John School and hide. I just believe that they need to make these more public, but they do it in some areas to protect them from being known. Now, as we've done research, Shared Hope's done research over the time, we find the top two things guys don't want is to have people know they did it, so they're ashamed of it, buying sex, and they don't want to go to jail. So I would say that if we make sure both of those things happen, John School, yes, understand how it's supposed to retard them from doing it again. But hey, let's wait a minute. It's like, okay, when you arrest a girl for prostitution, she loses income, she's put in jail. So he walks, just gets a fine and goes to John School. Now, they say these are only for adults, men buying adults. And it does deter some. So I have friends that are very supportive of them, and I'm not negative to them in some respects. But if I truly believed men were out there shopping for sex, nonviolent sex, with enabled women, it'd be different. But our research shows the buyers are buying young and violent and subservient. That sounds an awful lot like a domestic violence victim. They can't do anything because they'll start losing. They might lose their children. The pimp has their child. Oh no, I don't think we should let men off with going to Saturday school so they don't miss work and people don't know. I think that people need to know. They need to understand the cost will be their pictures. And I know that in your area, you do have that through some of the groups and at least one through the Arizona Anti-Trafficking Network. So now I would have more of their pictures up and don't have those down schools on Saturday so they don't have to lose work. Make sure they pay well for them so those go back into services for the people they hurt. And never, if they're shopping for kids, they should go to jail, directly to jail. Do not stop, do not pass go, the old monopoly. And I think that would be the downside that I've seen in them, and hopefully those are changing. Why would we think he's shopping for adult, in this society now, adult women who are enabled and have other options? No, they're not. Again, you just stay a little longer at the club or the hotel bar, or you just hook up online and meet somebody somewhere. That's the today. It's not about sex. It's not about romance. It's about violence and power and youth. So if they're out there shopping, the chance that they get a kid's high, the chance of shopping for a kid's high, and they have to pay for that.
Nancy, do we have any additional questions? Okay, I'm gonna check my messages. Just a moment, all.
By the way, while you're doing that, if there's somebody that wants this book, if they do linda.smith@sharedhope.org, linda.smith, I will send you one. Because if you get it and you say, I'm going to do something with this, then I've succeeded tonight in what every day is for me, and that's fighting this horrible thing and helping kids and women.
So I do have a note here that I'll read. It also has a question. It says, thank you, Linda Smith, for doing the important work you are doing. How can I help? I will always remember the little girl in Angkor Wat who fell over backwards while performing oral sex on an older, overweight white man who was sitting on a park bench. Contrast that scene with the legal prostitution neighborhood we visited / walked through one evening while in Holland. Shocked with the callousness of the women and men, you are patient and absolutely amazing. This is important work you are doing. Thank you very much. But the question in there was, how can I help? What's a good first step?
Well, the first step is doing something. I think Renting Lacy is, again, if you want one and you'll promise to read it and pass it on, linda.smith@sharedhope.org. In it, you're going to find a question and answer at the back that will make you think. It'll help you. Then stop right there and say, okay, I'm willing to do something. I'm willing to help fund the legal institute that is bringing justice. See, those are the hard ones. They're really the hard ones because nobody really wants to do that part. But I'll tell you, we rescue a lot of girls and children because of the legal that we didn't have before to be able to operate on the law that we didn't have before. So you might say, well, I want to do that, or I want to make calls. I want to help Shared Hope. I want people to understand. I want to go online and help. All you have to do is, again, you can use linda.smith@sharedhope.org. And I'll know it comes from this group tonight. And we'll connect you directly to the action page. You can go onto Shared Hope and go to the action page. You can contact right there locally the group that I admire probably the most, and that's the I call it trafficking. It's not the Arizona Anti-Trafficking Network. And or you can say, now what was that? Send me a note, and I will connect you to them directly. They do a lot of things that they need help with. Every group, including them, needs funding. But again, do something. We have quite a lot of materials that are downloadable. So let's say you're connected to a youth group, or maybe a church group, or maybe a men's or women's group. Most everything we have when you go online can be downloaded free. You can go into the resources and read your report card. There is, once you understand it, it's going to tick you off that your state still has things that they shouldn't have in your law, and the children still are not truly considered the victim of a violent crime that they should be. You have some conflict over here, they're a trafficking victim, over here they're a prostitute. You just need to get them under victim and make sure men can't say, but I didn't know how old she was when I was out there shopping for sex. And I just hate that argument totally. You will too. So those are some of the things you can do. But again, feel free to send me a note and say, but I want to do this. Help me connect to this. Many people say, I want to work at a shelter. I have to tell you, very rarely do I refer someone to a shelter, but it is because you need to work your way in, or I'm going to start a shelter. But there are some locally there. And I think that you could find them pretty easy by just going to the Phoenix area, child sex trafficking. I think Streetlight is one. It just comes to mind that has some services, but I'm sure there are some others. I could just go on and on, but that's how you can help.
Step one, do something that works. So we can probably start wrapping up now. So in the last few minutes that we have, is there anything else that everyone should know about your organization, about you, any other topics we missed this evening?
You did pretty well. You did pretty well. I'm encouraged. I look at this, and my husband passed away recently, and I go, well, maybe it's time to go. And I'm not very good, but I can be if I practice. And I thought, oh my goodness, no, I really have a 10-year plan. And I think it can be 5 if there's enough of us that come together and we affect the area we're in. We're pretty networked normally. Most of us have some people we know. We have some relationships, like your book club. I think one thing that I would love to see is somebody research how to get into more book clubs. Because I think the book clubs of America could actually change the culture of America, because there are people that would take action, like I think many of you will have, and some of you already have. So when you take action, be creative. If you have an idea, send it to me. Our ambassadors are, I think, about 1,200 individuals nationwide, and they do the most interesting, unique things. One woman puts on a concert each year, and she makes everybody she knows come. And she raises money, and she does it every year. Then there's people that just literally do a birthday fundraiser. I don't want any more presents. I don't even actually like the birthdays anymore, but hey, I think I'm just going to go to all of my family and friends and say, this year, this is what I want you to do to help me help change the culture that would allow children to be called prostitutes, and help me help those women and children. That's all I really want from you. Write a big check. I do that with my own family and friends, although, sometimes they don't want to hear from me. I've done it for so long. That isn't true. I think my children and grandchildren mostly are all donors anymore, and have the same passion that I do. Because maybe it's because I don't know, You don't want to make grandma unhappy.
Linda, thank you so much for this evening, for taking time. Our condolences in the loss of your husband. That must be very painful for you right now during a time where we cannot connect with the people we love the way we want to. So our condolences. Ms. Katie Campbell, thank you for being us in a very interesting conversation. I am going to unmute our guests so that they can just visit with each other and, or talk or share comments. If you have a few more minutes, Linda, just to hear those. I want to encourage all of you to continue in our book club or our Women in Our Community at KJZZ. This is a place where we can connect, where we can share passions, where we can learn, we can be educated about what's happening in our world. That's what public radio is all about. And so I was delighted that all of you could join us tonight, and stay tuned for more books. So with that said, Linda, if you can spend a few more minutes, we'll unmute everybody so they can share their comments openly. And thank you again for being with us tonight. We so appreciate your hard work, what you're doing. May we all be motivated to make some change.
Yes, thank you, Linda.
Oh, there we go. They unmuted them, they muted me.
Hello, everyone.
So I know that one of our guests tonight had said, I would like to talk to some of the other participants who read the book. And so if you have comments about Renting Lacy that you'd like to share, please feel free to do so. Feel free to unmute yourself. Julie, you read the book. Would you like to share anything?
Like I shared this with Linda before everybody else jumped on the call, was one of the things that just struck me was she had written this so beautifully that, you know, it was like, it was hard to, it was just so hard to imagine that this was fiction. And when it was nonfiction. And when I got to the end of the book and I realized that, it just broke my heart that these were real girls who just had their names changed. That was it. And this is happening here.
I know when I first read the book, I was extremely motivated to want to make a difference. I had heard Linda speak last year at an event that she had come to here in the Valley. And on my way home, I live in the West Valley, I passed a young girl on the street who just minutes after I had heard you speak, Linda, and it broke my heart. And I could not determine what I should do.
Yeah. Well, and on that, you can always, if you can take a picture of her and send it to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, you might have identified a missing child. That cannot hurt. That can't hurt. You can do the best you can. That still is an idea. I know there's one I saw at an airport. I know to this day, she was trafficked and I didn't do anything and it haunts me. But I didn't know what to do. But you always can get that to your police. You can call the police and say, I see a child who appears to be soliciting on this street. Can you come and check her out? And in your area, you're likely to have that be a yes. Not all parts of the nation, but probably would be. But it haunts us, but we can use it to say, next time I'm going to do something different.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good, because that's exactly what I thought. But here I've learned all about this. This young girl looks so young. And I thought, well, what should I do? I didn't know what to do to take action. So that's a good idea. It's a good idea. Thank you.